So we've talked a lot about like unconventional X, like lettuce, or unconventional ways to use brassicas. Now we're getting into seeds. What are your faves? Maybe I guess starting with radish.
I realized they were edible by accident many years ago, where inevitably you always have radish plants that bolt, and you never get around to harvesting them. At that point, they're too woody, and so you just let them go for the flowers and for the pollinators and all that. But I realized that when they seeded, they looked very different from all these other seed heads in the garden, where there are these long, like elongated, pointy end pod. And I got very curious about them. And I came to find out that not only were they edible, but they're absolutely delicious because they taste just like a radish. And so if you are growing radishes and you never got around to harvesting the root, you can wait for the seed heads to form and use that. And so they have this, depending on the type of radish you grow, they have this mildly to very spicy taste. They are crunchy. You can use them as is, like just throwing like the whole seed pod into a salad. There's nothing weird texture wise as far as like it being like fibrous or stringy or anything. It tastes like a crunchy radish, just with a different shape. But what I found that I really love is pickling them. And so I will grow radishes like an entire crop just to get the seed pods, just to make pickles with them.
Interesting.
And they actually make there's a few seed suppliers that will actually sell a type of radish called rat's tail radish, where it never, it's bred to make abundant seed pods, but the root itself is very minimal.
Yeah, that's actually one we carry at Botanical. I grew it out last year, and my first experience, it was on purpose because I knew that was the point of the rat's tail radish, was to grow it for that seed pod. And yeah, it's wild how close that flavor matches. I guess also I seem to notice earlier on in the seed pod's development, you get a different flavor profile. Later on, of course, it gets a little more, at least for me, a little more bitter or tougher.
Pungent.
Yeah, a little aggressive, I suppose. But the pickling idea is really cool because pickled radishes is a thing just for the root. Do you mix those two together, or do you just like to pickle the pods themselves standalone?
I typically just pickle the pods because I find them a lot more versatile. So I obviously throw them into salads, the pickled pods, but I really like them in a cocktail personally. Yeah. And so a Bloody Mary with pickled radish pods in it is pretty divine. You can also throw them into like martinis. Sometimes I just eat them straight out of a jar. My kids do that. They're just really convenient to pack along on a trip or a picnic. So I find them very satisfying. It's just, I guess, because they're so small, they're not as overwhelming as eating an entire pickled radish.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can kind of like pick and choose exactly the amount of flavor you want instead of having a big old slice. That makes sense. Okay, so we're going to get to a plant that I actually love. It's in my garden everywhere, both of my own choosing and sometimes not. And that would, of course, be nasturtium. But the confession I have to make, and those listening, you guys probably already know, but the flavor I hate. I can't stand it. And I don't know if it's genetic because it's so repulsive to me that it feels like something I can't even control. And I'm not a picky eater at all. But I know from a friend of mine and now you that you can use and eat the seeds in some clever ways.
Yes. So yeah, that's interesting. I find the nasturtiums themselves to have kind of a mustardy, peppery flavor.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to like that bitter mustard.
It gets to the point of like gas. It literally tastes like gasoline to me.
Oh, interesting.
And so like I just want to kind of spit. Who wants to drink that, right? So I spit it out. But yeah, no. A friend of mine, she showed me nasturtiums. Pickled nasturtium seeds as like a caper-esque type of product. I'm curious if that's something that you've messed around with.
It is, and that's exactly how I make them. So for me, maybe for everyone else, like when I lived in California, nasturtiums were very weedy. And so I let them reseed everywhere in my yard. I would have like an entire yard that's full of like all these vines. And at the end of the season, they start seeding, and they start out as these fresh green seeds before they dry out and drop to the ground. And what you want to use are these green seeds when they're still like kind of juicy. They're very fresh. You can pick them all. This actually also helps if you're trying to control their spread, is by picking these seeds before they dry up.
Yeah.
And so you go through like a brining and then a pickling process where you can turn them into I wouldn't say it's exactly like capers, but it's a caper-esque flavor. So it does have this type of kind of a pungency, but just like capers, you use them sparingly to accent different dishes. And I use them pretty much anywhere that I would use a caper.
Watch the full episode right here and subscribe for more new episodes every single week.